how advertising interacts with podcasts. But that's a whole other element of podcasting and revenue and getting a return on your investment that places can and should consider. And in addition to, I think Acacia, you mentioned Patreon. Like having the ability to open up your own subscriptions and build those audiences and offer them exclusive content, and even stuff like removing ads for the premium versions, but then how those ad partnerships boost your overall income, for the people who just listen but maybe aren't converted to being your subscribers yet. So yeah, there's so much that's interesting about that.
I feel like it kind of caught me at like the cost effectiveness of it, like in terms of like spending, kind of pouring money down the drain in terms of like ad space, like that evergreen content and like how it can like flourish at times that like you might not have content to like push out in a very reactive sense, but like it kind of does the work. It does the heavy lifting for itself. I know like just social media in general, like that's huge. Like when there's not something for you to necessarily push motive wise, but like you still need to stay relevant. Having spending that much, time, money, investment on, an hour podcast that turns into almost, seven posts in some ways, like that can engage over 3 months instead of, having ad space for 3 months. Like that's such a, and it's so applicable to like a meeting with a higher up where they're like, well, why are we doing a podcast? Like this is silly. Like when you can bring those hard stats and like and truly prove the value of it, like that's huge, and it's definitely something I took away from today.
Yeah, that's a great takeaway. And honestly, having the reason to justify the podcast and to justify that media is really important, and being able to turn that into, well, yeah, these seven posts, but also beyond that, right? Like we got to think about repurposing. You have your like, throwback Thursdays, and I mean that generally in the sense of like highlighting older content, right? But this is content that is evergreen, can always be relevant. You can share it when the news is right. You can share it when you need to share something about the history of your organization. You can share it, a year later. And in fact, those kinds of things are really encouraged. That's one of the biggest lessons I learned at Casted when I worked there. We were huge on this idea of repurposing and amplifying. And, you know, one of the things we helped customers with was obviously like turning their long form into clips and things like that. But, every one of those clips we learned could really be realistically used like 5 or 6 times over the course of a year if you just space them out enough and not really devalue that organization's algorithm, or devalue their engagement. Realistically, what I've learned is that a podcast can make everyone's life in a marketing environment so much easier because of how much content it yields.